All right, strap in everyone, because today we are going deep on a court transcript. And this one, well, this one's got some real law and order energy to it.
It does?
Yeah, we're looking at a case out of West Milwaukee. A guy named Travis Hines got a citation. And man, this thing just gets more and more layered the deeper you go.
And what's fascinating to me is how this all ties into that whole trend of citizens documenting everything these days.
Right.
So we're not just talking law here, but how technology, Hines' YouTube channel specifically, where he films police interactions, how that all feeds into the legal arguments.
So let's rewind to the beginning, set the scene. 12:45 a.m., Officer Aide's patrolling a Target parking lot. Target's closed, but he's already checked 2 other cars. Didn't write them up, which is interesting. And then he comes across Hines sitting in his car.
Right, and what seems like a pretty routine thing.
Yeah.
You know, cop sees car in lot, takes a hard left.
Oh, yeah?
You can see in the transcript, Hines straight up refuses to show his ID, offers to exchange IDs with the officer, which is, I've never heard that before, and then, get this, he invokes the Fifth Amendment.
I know, right? Like, whoa, hold on. Fifth Amendment's usually for not incriminating yourself, right? Criminal stuff. But this is a civil case.
Totally. Usually you see the fifth pop up when someone's worried what they say might get them in deeper trouble, not a parking ticket situation.
So right off the bat, it's a different vibe than your average license and registration, please.
For sure. And this is where things get even wilder. The prosecution, they bring up Hines' YouTube channel as evidence.
No way, really?
Yeah, they're basically saying, look, this guy's got a history of filming cops, so this wasn't just a random thing. He was looking for a confrontation.
That's a big leap, isn't it? I mean, just because someone's posted videos before doesn't automatically mean they're always out to provoke something.
No, it's a slippery slope, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much weight should online stuff have in court? Does a YouTube channel mean someone's always going to act a certain way?
Right. It's like, do my funny cat videos mean I'm going to be tossing tuna to stray felines during a traffic stop? It's tricky territory.
It is. And this case, who knows? It might set some precedent. Judges are going to be dealing with this more and more, how online stuff gets used as evidence.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of tricky, we got to talk about the body camera footage. Or should I say lack of it?
Oh, yeah, this is where the plot thickens.
Yeah, so Officer Aide, he says there's this 30-second delay on the audio after he turns the camera on. So the very beginning of the encounter, poof, gone.
Right. And then on top of that, there's talk about the police department maybe having redacted some of the footage.
Like edited it?
Yep, exactly. And you can imagine Hines is not happy about this at all. He wants the whole thing unedited, no gaps, because, you know, the idea is body cams are supposed to make things transparent, right?
Sure, hold everyone accountable.
But if there are chunks missing, or it's been edited, well, suddenly it's not so clear-cut.
Totally undermines the whole point.
It does, and it makes you think, even with this technology meant to improve things, it can still get messy, create more problems.
It's true. It's like having a puzzle with a bunch of pieces missing. You just can't get the full picture.
No, you can't. And in this case, there's a lot of those missing pieces. So let's get down to brass tacks. Legally speaking, Hines got cited under this West Milwaukee ordinance. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
It basically says you can't be loitering in a manner not usual for law-abiding individuals.
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, but even I can tell that's vague. What the heck does that even mean?
Right. Like, what's usual? Who decides?
Yeah, like, is humming to myself while I wait in my car unusual? I mean, it's not hurting anyone. Is that enough to get me in trouble?
And that is exactly Hines' point. He's saying it's way too broad, open to interpretation. What one cop thinks is weird, another might be totally fine with.
So he's basically saying, how am I supposed to know what's okay if there's no clear rule?
Precisely, and that's part of his defense. He's not just fighting the ticket. He's saying the law itself is messed up.
Wow. Okay, so he's going after the whole enchilada.
He is, but it's smart, because if he can convince the judge that the law is too vague, well, the whole case might crumble.
So that's one citation, but wait, wasn't there another one?
Oh, yeah, he got hit with obstructing an officer, too.
That's the one for not showing his ID, right?
You got it, and his argument is, look, I didn't physically stop the officer from doing anything. I just didn't answer his question.
So it's words versus actions. But is that really enough to be considered obstructing?
That's the legal question right there, and it gets into some deep water.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, the officer saying, look, not giving your ID, that slows me down, could be dangerous, messes with my investigation.
Right, I can see that side.
But Hines is saying, whoa, hold up. If that's all it takes, then cops can just demand ID from anyone they want. No real reason needed.
And that's a whole other can of worms, right? I mean, everyone's got the right to remain silent, so where's the line?
Exactly. Where does not answering become obstructing? That's what the judge has to figure out, and Hines isn't making it easy.
No, he's not. We've got missing footage, a super vague law, and this whole debate about what obstructing even means. This is like a legal lasagna, layers on
It
layers.
is, and Hines, he keeps digging. You can tell he's done his homework on this stuff.
So what else does he bring up? What's his next move?
Well, remember how the officer said it was weird for Hines to be in the lot so late, like almost 3 hours after Target closed? Hines challenges that. He starts asking about the signs, the announcements they make about parking overnight, if there are any.
Oh, smart. So he's saying, hey, if it wasn't clear I couldn't be there, how's that my fault?
Right, like if the rules are hidden or confusing, how's anyone supposed to follow them?
That's a great point. It's like getting a speeding ticket when the speed limit sign's blocked by a tree. Yeah, technically you broke the law, but is it fair?
Exactly. And Hines goes even further. He asked the officer if he, personally, checked if the security system was working that night. The cameras, the announcements, those flashing blue lights they use sometimes.
Oh, wow. So he's not just saying the rules weren't clear. He's saying maybe he didn't even know about the rules because the system was down.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's important.
Wow.
Because it shifts the blame. If the lot owner wasn't doing their part, can they really blame Hines for being there?
Man, this Hines, he's really making the officers sweat, isn't he? So does it work? Does this strategy get him anywhere? I gotta know. What happens next?
Oh, you'll have to wait for part 2 for that.
All right, so we left off with Hines really putting the officer through the ringer, making him account for every detail, signage, security systems, the whole 9 yards.
And the officer, he's sticking to his story, late at night, refusal to identify, reasonable suspicion. But Hines, he's locked on to this loitering ordinance, won't let it go.
Which, to be fair, is super vague, right? You can't just say acting unusual and expect that to stick. People are weird. It's not a crime.
Exactly. And Hines knows this. He even asked the officer straight up, like, okay, define unusual behavior for me, specifically in this parking lot.
Oh, smart. So he's putting the officer on the spot, making him draw a line in the sand where the law doesn't really have one.
Brilliant tactic, because it exposes how subjective this all is. What seems off to one person might be totally normal to another.
And suddenly it's not about whether Hines was actually doing anything wrong, but whether the officer's personal opinion is enough to justify a citation.
Right, and that's a much bigger issue, one that could affect anyone, not just Hines in this specific situation.
I'm starting to see why Hines decided to represent himself. He's thinking about the bigger picture, not just trying to get out of a ticket.
Absolutely. He's challenging the system itself, which is a risky move, but it could pay off big time if he wins.
So what about the other citation, the obstructing an officer one? Did he manage to make any progress there?
He did, and this is where things get really juicy, legally speaking. So remember, the basis for that charge was Hines not showing his ID, right?
Right, but his argument was that he didn't physically do anything to stop the officer. It was just words, not actions.
And that distinction, words versus actions, that's where the legal debate gets really interesting.
So is that a valid defense? Can you just talk your way out of an obstruction charge?
It's a gray area, for sure. And it gets to the heart of police power versus individual rights. So the officer's side is, hey, not giving me your ID, that creates a delay, could be dangerous for me, holds up my investigation.
And I can see that, especially if the situation's already tense.
Totally. But Hines is saying if that's all it takes, then any cop can demand ID from anyone for any reason. No real suspicion needed.
And that opens a whole other can of worms, because we all have the right to remain silent, so where do you draw the line? When does refusing to answer a question become obstruction?
And that is the million-dollar question. The judge has to figure that out. And Hines, well, he's not making it easy.
It sounds like he's raising some really important points, like this could affect everyone's rights, not just his.
Absolutely. And he keeps pushing. He points out that the other cars in the lot that night, they showed their IDs and were fine. No problem.
Oh, interesting. So he's saying if everyone else got to leave after showing ID, why was I singled out?
Right. It implies that maybe the officer wasn't really concerned about safety or doing his job. Maybe it was something else.
Like he had it out for Hines for some reason.
It's suggestive, for sure. And Hines, he's smart. He uses this to make the officer look inconsistent, like his actions don't match his words.
Okay, so he's chipping away at the officer's credibility, but does he have any legal backup for this?
He does. And remember the Heibel case we talked about earlier, the one that said sometimes you do have to give your ID to police. Well, Hines brings that up, but he uses it to challenge the officer's understanding of the law.
Oh, so he's saying if you're going to use that case against me, you better know exactly how it applies, and maybe you don't.
Exactly. It's a classic legal tactic. Force your opponent to explain their reasoning, and sometimes that reveals weaknesses in their argument.
It's like, okay, officer, explain to me, the judge, and everyone watching exactly how this case supports what you did.
Exactly. Puts the pressure on. And to make things even more interesting, Hines brings up mitigating circumstances.
Mitigating, what does that mean?
Basically, he's saying, look, even if I technically broke the rules, were there any reasons why I might have done so without meaning to?
So, like, maybe he didn't understand the signs, or maybe he thought the ordinance meant something different.
Right, he's raising the question of intent. Was he deliberately obstructing, or was it an honest mistake?
It's a big difference, like someone who blows past a stop sign because they're texting versus someone who just didn't see it.
Exactly, and this gets to the heart of reasonable doubt. Hines is saying, the officer didn't have enough evidence to prove I was doing this on purpose.
He's not saying he's innocent. He's saying the officer can't prove he's guilty.
Exactly. Very clever. And you can tell it's starting to get to the officer. He keeps repeating the same arguments, but he sounds less confident.
Like Hines is poking holes in his story.
Definitely. But remember, Hines was doing all this from a library, using their Wi-Fi. And wouldn't you know it, just as he's wrapping up his questioning, the library closes.
Oh, no. Talk about bad timing. So what? He's just stuck there. Case dismissed.
Not quite. We'll get to that in part 3, but it's a good cliffhanger, right?
So there we are. Hines left high and dry. Internet's gone. Case hanging in the balance. It's almost poetic, you know, this guy fighting for transparency and accountability, and boom, the technology fails him.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast, and I bet he was stressing. But you got to give him credit. He doesn't fold, apologizes to the judge, explains the situation, and you can hear it in his voice. Even through the bad connection, he's not done fighting.
Good for him. So what happened? Did the judge just say, tough luck, or did they give him a chance to get back online?
The judge actually gave him a break, a few minutes to figure out his connection, which I thought was pretty decent, showed some flexibility.
Yeah, nice to see a little bit of humanity in the legal system sometimes. So did he manage to reconnect?
He did, thankfully. Pops back on the Zoom call, a little blurry audio cutting out here and there, but he's back in the game, ready to keep going.
Man, what a roller coaster. So the technical stuff's sorted. What happens next? Is this where Hines gets to present his side of things?
You got it. It's his turn to lay out his case. And remember, he's doing this all himself, no lawyer, which means he's got to do everything a lawyer would, present evidence, call witnesses, make legal arguments, the whole shebang.
Man, that's a lot. It's like trying to fix your own car when you've only watched YouTube tutorials. You might have the basics, but actually doing it is a whole other story.
For sure. And in this case, the stakes are pretty high. But Hines, she doesn't flinch. He tells the judge, I'm not calling any witnesses.
Whoa, hold on. No witnesses. That's kind of surprising, especially after he was so adamant about getting that video evidence in. Why wouldn't he want someone to back him up?
It's a gamble, no doubt, but it tells me he thinks he did enough damage during his questioning of the officer, plus his legal arguments. He's basically saying, I poked enough holes in their case, I don't need anyone else to testify.
So it's all riding on his ability to convince the judge? That's bold.
It is. And the judge who's been listening to all this, you can tell he's taking it seriously, and then here comes the cliffhanger. He says he's taking the matter under advisement.
So no immediate verdict.
Nope. He's going to take some time, think it over, look at the evidence, the law, all that stuff, before making a decision.
Makes sense. You don't want a judge just rushing through something this complicated, especially when it involves some pretty big legal questions.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're still left wondering, did Hines pull it off? Did his attention to detail, his legal arguments, was it enough? Or did the whole thing crumble under the weight of the citations? That power imbalance between a citizen and the police.
Man, what a case. Missing footage, vague laws, legal maneuvering, internet going out. It had everything.
It did. And it shows you. The law, it's not just rules in a book. It's a process. It's messy. It's influenced by people, interpretations, even tech problems.
So true. And while we don't know the final outcome, we learned a lot about how technology can both help and hurt, how filming things is changing the game legally, and how one person, if they know their stuff and they're determined enough, can stand up and challenge the system.
And let's not forget, behind all the legal stuff, this is a human story. Someone's real life is affected by this decision, and that's important to remember.
Absolutely. So the next time you see a legal case in the news, remember Travis Hines, the guy who stood up and fought, armed with his knowledge and his rights, and remember that every case, big or small, has ripples. It affects more than just the people directly involved.
It does, and who knows, maybe down the line we'll find out what the judge decided and we can revisit this whole thing.
That'd be interesting, but until then, keep your eyes peeled, your ears open, and your minds engaged. There's always more to learn and more to question.